What's going on, guys? Welcome into another episode of Money Moves. We are rolling solo today in the studio. I'm going to do some sound bites, some live screen sharing. I'm going to try some stuff out here today to hopefully bring you guys with the best listening experience possible. We are officially less than 1 week away from the election. And we're going to cover a lot of different topics around the election, around politics, around the stock market, because at the end of the day, politics, if you haven't figured this out yet, policy impacts our stock market in a very big way, our real estate market in a very big way, right? Our economy in a really big way. And ultimately, that trickles down to you as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as somebody who's out there trying to go out and live your best life possible. Politics play a big role in it. More probably of a role than people would like to have. And I think that's definitely something that's on this particular election ticket, which is big government versus small government. And we're just going to talk about a lot of different things today, different people's takes, tweets, videos, sound bites, all kinds of stuff that hopefully can bring you some value as you decide how to position yourself to navigate forward, no matter who's in there. At the end of the day, nobody's coming to save you. It's not going to be Donald Trump. It's not going to be Kamala Harris. The only person who ultimately is going to save you is going to be you, taking ownership and accountability of your own decisions, your own life, obviously understanding that we're all playing in this game, this matrix, the way this system and machine has been set up. We're doing the best we can to navigate it based on what we know. And as we continue to learn and become more informed and weaponized, right, skilled, we can play this game to the best of our ability to achieve the results that you're looking for. So let's dig in today. We saw this week big news on the Joe Rogan interview. 38 million views and counting as of today. I saw a really funny quote or comment on Joe Rogan's interview on YouTube, and somebody had commented on it. Imagine telling someone 15 years ago the host of The Fear Factor and The Apprentice talking to each other on a podcast would be the most important political event of 2024. Pretty wild when you really take a look back, because I grew up on Fear Factor. Man, I freaking loved Joe Rogan on that show. And I even watched a little bit of The Apprentice. And, if you would have told somebody back then, fast forwarding 15 years, that these two guys would be two of the biggest, most influential figures in American culture, most people would probably be shocked, especially when you talk about politics, right? But if you haven't listened to the Joe Rogan interview, pretty insane to see how many views it got. 38 million views in just a little over 3 days. In Kamala Harris's interview with Call Her Daddy podcast, only 711,000, and that's been up for at least a couple weeks now. It has been noted that J.D. Vance is going on this week. And Joe Rogan even came out and said, one of the reasons why I like Joe Rogan is he calls a spade a spade. He's really well read, really well researched. And he even, multiple times Trump tried to go in on her. And Joe Rogan did a good job of just playing the middle and saying, I would love to just have a conversation with her. I'd love to be able to ask her, the questions and be in an unscripted environment that ultimately is what most people just want to see, right? They want to see is. And I think what Trump has done really, really well is by going on these podcasts in these unscripted situations, many of them against, people that are somewhat oppositional to his talking points and his politics, he still goes and he shows more of who he is. And the Sean Ryan Show, I don't know if you followed him. He's a top, I think, 5 or 10 podcasts in the world now. He did a little soundbite that I just thought was amazing. And I'm going to see if I can pull this up for you here real fast, because I think this just shows the power of media. It shows the power of the way the media has been done for so long, and somewhat of the manipulation and the lies and a lot of the control over the narrative social media has democratized that in a really big way. And so I figure, what better way to showcase, the idea of kind of media and the power of the people, and just this democratization of how news is reported and shared. It's no longer just what, the elite MSM media tells you is the truth. More and more people are finding ways to uncover what that actually means and what it looks like and what it sounds like. And when you think about what, Joe Rogan just did with, Donald Trump, hosting a long-form 3-hour unscripted conversation, whether that is, obviously he did it with Donald Trump, and if he can do that with Kamala Harris, I think that would be a great thing as well, to show people, who she is, right? There were so many thousands of comments of people saying, I can't believe that I got tricked into hating this guy, because when you can actually see in a more transparent, organic, authentic, you may not like exactly who he is, how he says, and what he says, but just understanding more that little 5-second clip or soundbite, the context to who this person is, he may not be as bad or as evil as they are making him out to be. And by inviting them all on this podcast, on this platform, it was just historic. And the numbers tell it all. I mean, you talk about, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, even Fox News. I mean, they're not getting a fraction of viewership that podcasts like Joe Rogan are. And, traditional media covers podcasts, and rarely the other way around. So that is really telling too. And I just thought, really interesting. Sean Ryan noted in this soundbite his thoughts on how historic this was.
What a day, man. What a day. Last night, that interview between Trump and Rogan, it just means so much more than just a presidential candidate being on the #1 podcast in the world. That signifies the end of legacy media. They can't pull that off. And they have lied to us for so long, and shoved agenda after agenda and lie after lie and propaganda down our throats since before I was even born. And nobody seemed to be paying attention until the last couple years. And, just what a historic moment. And I'll tell you another thing that signifies is all these politicians that hide behind 30-second news bites and get away with all the shit that they've been getting away with. That shit is done. A new rule was written last night, and that is, if you want to be successful in politics, you're going to have a conversation, a long-form, unscripted conversation with the people that you intend to serve. The days of us serving you and you getting away with all that shit, that's fucking over.
So he went on to, just share his thoughts on it, but I couldn't agree more, right, of just how impactful, podcasting has become. And after this Joe Rogan interview, 38 million, views and counting, Donald Trump's odds of winning the 2024 election have hit a new record high of 6, according to Kalshi. I think it was at 66% or 67% on Polymarket. Again, polls and a lot of that stuff, who knows, how accurate it really is. In my opinion, it's actually one form of kind of swaying momentum and people's psychology. I think the fact that they created these betting markets is a little bit more accurate, just to show where people's money and they're putting their money where their mouth is and where their actions are going to be. So we'll see whether or not. I think it's still going to come down to, it's a close race, going to come down to the, battleground states. But as of this last week, a big rule for election integrity, a conservative U.S. appeals court has sided with Republicans in ruling against a Mississippi law that allows election officials to count mail ballots that are postmarked by Election Day. We've seen, videos of ballot drop boxes on fire, states making, voter ID illegal. You look at, this soundbite from Joe Rogan.
That's to have people that can vote that shouldn't be voting. That's the only reason. If you only want the people to vote that should be voting, you ask for ID. Just like you ask for ID for everything else. You want people to vote that probably shouldn't be voting so you can get some extra votes. That's the only thing that makes sense.
So, right, the thing that people care about is just election integrity. You want to know that it's a free, it's a fair, it's an unbiased election. And on both sides, they're both playing dirty. But when you see, right, laws being enacted to not, protect and uphold the integrity, which is obviously a voter ID, making sure that our citizens are voting in our elections, not illegal citizens. When you think about, the counting of these ballots, the transparency of the counting of these ballots, people just want to know that it's fair. If you lost fair and square, we're all big boys and big girls, we got to move on. But the erosion of that trust, which has been displayed in many different scenarios over the course of the last few elections and just over the course of time through media and laws and warfare, I think that's ultimately where people are starting to get fed up and really question and also push back on this stuff. But, we saw Kamala Harris note that she was going to try and potentially explore getting on the Joe Rogan podcast. They were essentially wanting Rogan to go to her, fly to her, do it for an hour. They had all these different rules and regulations, and he's like, look, do it in the studio, do it unscripted. This is what people really want, right? But when you talk about, the division and the hate, and it was just interesting to me to see how many, people have been talking about, the Trump rally that he just did in Madison Square Garden. I mean, they had videos of, equating it to a Hitler rally in back in the early 30s. The one thing about when you start making those comparisons and how divisive it is, right? Like Hitler controlled the media. If we really want to pull back, and talk facts. Hitler controlled the media. Hitler hated free speech. He did not like gun ownership, and he hated capitalism. Hitler divided everyone by race. So you tell me if that sounds like more of Donald Trump's campaign or Kamala Harris's campaign, because I do know what side of the administration has been censoring free speech, which has been trying to take away gun ownership rights, and which ultimately has been trying to go against capitalism and move more towards socialism and actually has control over the media, is talking about, certain people not supporting certain people because of their sex or because of their color. And it hasn't been on the right. And it's been pretty clear unless you're watching CNN. So very interesting to kind of, really just take a step back and look at who's fueling the hate, who's fueling the division. And, when they were stating that it was only Donald Trump in this, Madison Square Garden. If you really want to know a fun fact, Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump have all held political rallies at MSG. So I guess that just makes everybody that went to a political rally a Nazi. But I will say I saw an African man and I saw a Muslim man all taking stage on this so-called Nazi rally. So again, I think people are just getting too smart. They're fed up with it. And this kind of fear porn and pandering, it's running thin. And I think her odds are showing that. So very interesting to see how things are shifting. Patrick Bet David, let's pull up what he put in a tweet as of yesterday. Here's what I'll say. I see a lot of people, stating that it's going to be a landslide. It's going to be a red wave. Well, they said that in 2020 as well. And we all know how that played out. But according to Patrick Bet David in his latest tweet, 15 signs that Trump is going to win, barring a black swan event. The Los Angeles Times refused to endorse a candidate for the first time in 20 years. That's a pretty big deal. And as of this week, the Washington Post, the publication owned by Jeff Bezos, just announced that they would not be, he basically blocked the decision to have a presidential endorsement of Kamala Harris and basically said we need to get out of politics, that the news and media is no longer trusted in the way it is, and he wants to basically even the playing field and hire more conservative writers. More than 200,000 people had canceled their digital subscriptions for the Washington Post by midday Monday following that publication decision. And coming back over to the tweet from Patrick Bet David, right? So we're seeing more people not endorse when traditionally they would. We've got celebrity endorsements are backfiring instead of working like they once did. Trump's one interview with Rogan got more views than all of Kamala Harris's interviews did combined. Mainstream media stopped talking policies, instead using fear porn to win. Nazi, Hitler, da-da-da-da-da. Republicans are leading early voting, which rarely happens. Tech CEOs are calling Trump, not Harris. Tim Cook basically noted that he was reaching out and starting to build some relationships. You see some of these bigger, companies starting to potentially, looks like build a bridge versus, the kind of stiff arm that they were given in the past. European stocks have dropped 7% since late September due to fear of Trump's tariffs. Democrats are losing both the Jewish and Muslim vote. Trump rallies in blue states are bringing in record-breaking attendance. Coachella had 100,000 plus. Madison Square Garden this last weekend sold out, plus had over 75,000 estimated people watching it outside. You got Kamala has lost the black vote, according to this tweet from Pat Bet David, doing worse than Clinton, Obama, Hillary, or Biden, even though she is black. AOC and Tim Waltz playing Madden, streaming on Twitch. Desperation at the highest level, according to him. From April to September, Trump-branded merch on Amazon sold $140 million worth versus Kamala's $26 million. Steelworkers Union in Pennsylvania endorsed Trump. Border Patrol Union endorsed Trump. And last but not least, Putin endorsed Kamala. Now, whether or not, these are reasons why Trump is going to win, barring a black swan event or not. I just thought those were interesting takes from his perspective. So we'll see. But how does the S&P 500 historically perform after the presidential election? In the last 8 election years, the S&P 500 rallied an average of 6.6% in the 6 months after Election Day. Now, by comparison, 6 months leading up to Election Day, the index saw an average return of 1.5, right? A lot of people holding, firm or steady, cautious, a lot of volatility leading up to and through the election. And then once understanding who is going to be in there, what the administration's kind of stance and policies ultimately are going to look like, right? Then we see some rallies the 6 months after the election. In the last two elections, the S&P 500 posted 3.9% and 18.5% returns 6 months prior, and 12.1% and 24.4% gains 6 months after the election. Meanwhile, over the last 6 months, the S&P 500 is up 14.2%, well above the historical average. History suggests that we're going to see more gains for stocks coming post-election. I know Mr. Breedwell feels that way. He'll be giving his thoughts and take when he gets back. But we have been seeing some interesting responses to the Fed's 50 basis point surprise rate cut. We are hearing that the Fed could pause rate cuts at its meeting next week if, this is an if, the October jobs report is hot. Now, there's some things that they don't want to see, right? Strong jobs report, inflation coming back, and obviously, the economy continuing to struggle and flounder. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate climbed back above 7% today, reaching its highest point since early July, which is just 1 month after that 50 basis point rate cut by the U.S. Fed. And so what it's saying is that, the market is really reflecting that the Fed might have lost some credibility, and they are going to see some, challenges going forward on how they navigate this very interesting economic dynamic. Housing affordability, the median U.S. home continues to sell for over $400,000. Even as rates remain elevated, the housing market is effectively frozen with high rates and high prices. The volume of activity has significantly slowed down. There have only been 5 days over the last month where mortgage rates have declined. Straight line higher interest rates after a Fed pivot begins is definitely not normal or customary. So something must give, and the markets think it's going to be the Fed. We're also seeing U.S. banks are currently sitting on $750 billion losses on real estate debt. That is 7 times larger than it was in 2008 when the housing bubble popped. And many unrealized losses are concentrated in portfolios that are crucial to bank profits. So something is definitely feeling a little bit unstable in some of these areas. Is it big enough to really create ripple effects across the market? Time will tell. I did want to cover a quick story around something that I saw on the IRS. Now, I know many of you are actively, playing the income and wealth building game. The other thing is, of course, to learn how to play the tax savings game, right? And from the Money Cruncher account on Twitter last week, he released a report. The IRS closed 582,944 tax audits in how do they decide who to audit. This is a nice little thread that I figured I'd go through so that way you can, maybe be a little bit more aware of how do they actually decide who they audit? How do you stay out of an audit? How do you stay compliant? And the answer is they do so by using computer algorithms and statistical profiles. So here's what you need to know about IRS audits. After you file your tax return, the first thing the IRS does is check your social security number and name to ensure they match their internal records. Then the computer looks for any math errors on your tax return. These are rare nowadays as tax software does a decent job with calculations. If everything is correct, the system engages a matching program. The matching program checks to ensure that all the data from Forms 1099, 1098, and W-2 is entered appropriately in your tax return. Any unmatched info will flag your tax return, i.e., make sure that you and/or your CPA are properly filling out the form with all the accurate information, because just by missing that simple task and checkbox, you're now going to be flagged, right? Attention to detail obviously is critical. Then your tax return faces the big test, discriminant function system scoring. Here, the IRS computer constructs a statistical profile based on your income, profession, expected taxes, and deductions. Why is it needed? Well, the IRS doesn't know if you cheated on your taxes, so it compares your return statistically with the group of people who have cheated on their taxes. If you have similar characteristics, then there is a higher probability that you cheated too. IRS also frequently uses the net worth method to analyze reasonableness. The net worth method is primarily being used as a way to prove taxable income, but also to corroborate other methods of proving income, and also to verify accuracy of reported taxable income. Ratio analysis is also calculated on your return. If you have a $50,000 of income, but Schedule A deductions of $30,000, how are you surviving? You will probably get audited. The IRS also frequently checks whether deductions on your Schedule C match your income, or if you have deductions with $0 of income, for example, having $40,000 of income but also $40,000 of expenses is a red flag. The IRS often questions the validity of your Schedule C deductions. Another way you can get audited is through related examinations. Returns may be selected for audit when they involve issues with other taxpayers, such as business partners or investors whose returns have been selected for examination, right? Guilty by association. That's something that you want to be careful of. One thing you need to keep in mind is that you are guilty unless you can prove otherwise. This means that you are responsible for any numbers reported on your tax return, not the IRS having to prove that you did something wrong. If you're selected for an audit, your information is typically sent to your local district office. The examination division will then contact you for an office audit. What are they typically interested in? Well, you know what they do. They're in the business of getting more money out of you. You should also never give them any information that was not requested. They are not on your side. Once the audit is over, they will issue a report with any adjustments. Your next steps are to appeal or pay the balance. That is something that ultimately I experienced. I've been audited twice. I was able to get one written off. The other one was a very small adjustment. But again, those are things that the more you know, the more you can understand details, who you're in business with, how you're properly doing, your expenses, and making sure that you're not getting too far into the gray area. Those are the things that could potentially create and trigger IRS audits. And let me just say, it is like getting another job thrown onto your plate, and not only are you not getting paid for it, most likely it's going to end up in you paying more, not only with your time and resources to give them everything they need, but probably with the money that they ultimately end up finding out. So again, something really important. The income game is something we talk a lot about. The wealth building game is something we talk a lot about. The tax game is also something that is extremely important and critical. So as we wrap up today, let me give you guys an interesting little thread here on Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman, very large hedge fund owner and investor and capitalist that ultimately pulled off one of the greatest trades in history. In 2020, Bill Ackman bet against the credit market. The result, he turned $20 million into $2.7 billion in just 30 days. Here's how he did it. The background story is in the 2010s, he was really not, and they weren't great years for him and his firm and his company. He underperformed the S&P 500. He lost $1 billion in the Herbalife short. His fund shrunk from $16 billion to $6 billion. And he had to recover confidence. In the early 2020s, he was looking for a comeback. And in the obviously early 2020s, Ackman noticed that COVID-19 was spreading fast. He reasoned that businesses that would get the largest damage were hotels, airlines, and restaurants. And to exploit the upcoming crash, Ackman started to buy credit default swaps. What are credit default swaps? They're basically owning an insurance on another company's debt. If the company defaults on its debt, you get the payment from the insurance company. A typical credit default swap contract is a 5-year contract, and Bill Ackman heavily bought. He bought credit default swaps. He would pay $27 million premium every single month. COVID-19 hit the U.S. in mid-2020. Hospitals were overwhelmed, so the government imposed lockdowns in major cities. Hotels, airlines, and restaurants started to default on their debt. This skyrocketed the prices of credit default swaps that Ackman held. And as you see on the chart below, if you're watching this video, it spiked significantly. He had started to pay premiums in February, and it only took 30 days for the defaults to start. His premium payment of $27 million turned into $2.7 billion in just a month. His portfolio closed in 2020 up 70%, while the S&P 500 was still struggling to get out of negative territory. The lesson in this trade, Ackman demonstrated all the characteristics of great investors. Analyze thoroughly, stick with your fundamentals, have the courage to be a contrarian, demand favorable risk-reward ratios. And if you can learn from other great investors like this, especially somebody that didn't have a good track record for a little season, right? But he stayed the course, he skilled up, he continued to take, big shots and swing for the fences, acting as a contrarian, and he got paid out big. One of the things that I always just love to say is, as an investor, if you're somebody that really is in this for the long haul, the stamina and the grit and the perseverance that's required to succeed in anything, let alone in wealth building, there's so many days and weeks that I just feel like I leave my office sometimes and I'm like, man, I'm getting my ass kicked. You don't get the big wins that you're always hoping for. But when you do get those big wins, they far outweigh and supersede the little losses and the little ass kickings that you take day in and day out, or week in and week out, or month in and month out. Those wins are ultimately what keep you. It's like that good golf shot, right? That why, if you suck at golf, why do you go and play golf all the time, right? It's for that one shot where you just hit it right down the fairway, so sweet. You absolutely blistered off the tee and you're like, man, that felt so good, right? That hole is what keeps me coming back, because that is the way investing is as well. You're not going to have these big lightning in a bottle moments all the time, right? You're not going to get those dopamine hits all the time. But when you do the right things over an extended period of time, the little things ultimately lead you into a position to having something big happen. And that's what I've learned from stories like Bill Ackman's, right? From other great investors that are in commercial real estate that I've been around, other people like Ryan who have been just consistent and diligent, not too high, not too low, riding the wave of volatility, but consistently staying in the game, getting in the batter's box, knowing that you're going to strike out, but you keep getting in that batter's box, you are going to get on base, you are going to put points up on the board, and ultimately you can win the game of wealth building the way you're looking to play it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let me know what you guys think about the sound bites, about some of the topics covered. Of course, mainly covering a lot of what's going on with the election based on the fact that we are down to the wire. Most importantly, get out and vote. Exercise that right and that freedom to vote. We still live in the freest, most amazing, most opportunistic country in the world. And, no matter who is in, I do believe that who's in that White House does matter this time more than ever. But that being said, no matter who gets in there, you taking accountability and ownership for your future, for your family, for your financial freedom. Nobody's going to take more ownership and care about that than you are. So thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's show, all I ask, leave a review, share this with somebody you think can get some value from it. We'll see you guys next week's episode.